There were 200 people in the Morty ballroom the night Sofia Conti broke Matteo Bruno's wrist, and only one of them understood why she had done it. He was standing on the far side of the room, holding a glass of red wine he had stopped drinking from 4 minutes ago, and he was her cousin's father, and he was the most dangerous man in New York, and she had been in love with him in silence for 7 years. She thought, as she watched Matteo Bruno's knees hit the marble floor, that this was the worst sin she had ever committed. She was about to find out it was not a sin at all, and the man who had made sure of that had been lying in a grave in Queens for 23 years. Her name, she would learn before the night was over, was not Sofia Conti. The father she had never known had whispered it into a dying breath in the back of a moving car in 2002, and the man who had heard him whisper it had just set down his glass, across the ballroom, and was now walking toward her the way a wolf walks toward the thing it has been forbidden from touching its entire life. To understand why she broke Matteo Bruno's wrist, you have to go back 7 years. To a balcony. To a girl who was 17. To the night she discovered that the worst thing she could possibly love had already moved inside her like a second heart. She had been standing on the terrace of the Morty penthouse the first time it happened. Alina's 16th birthday. 100 guests. Summer heat even at midnight. Sofia had slipped out onto the balcony to breathe, and she had looked back through the glass doors into the room full of men she had been taught to fear since she was old enough to walk. And Dario Morty had been crossing the ballroom. Just crossing it, going from one conversation to another. A man in his early 40s in a black suit with silver at his temples, not hurrying, not performing, not aware he was being watched. And Sofia had looked at him, through the glass, and she had felt something move inside her chest that she did not have a word for. It was not a crush. It was not a thrill. It was a door opening in a room she had not known was in her. And standing in that door was the man on the other side of the glass, who had been her uncle since she was 5 years old, and who had never in 12 years looked at her twice. She was 17. She thought she was going to be sick. She had gone back inside and laughed at the right moments and gone home and not slept, and for 5 years after that she had kept the door shut. She had told herself it would pass. 20-year-old women did not love 45-year-old men who were their blood. It would pass. It had not passed. It had instead done the thing love did when it was not allowed to move, which was burrow. It had made a nest inside her. It had slept through her college graduation. It had slept through the 3 men she had tried to date at 19 and 20 and 21. It had slept through the job at the florist and the studio apartment and the deadbolt she had installed herself. It had slept for 5 years, and then, the Christmas she was 22, it had woken up. Christmas Eve dinner. Her mother's apartment. The long table with the white cloth and the 2 candelabras Adriana had inherited from her grandmother and only lit on Christmas. 18 of them, all blood, all quiet, all behaving because Dario Morty had come. He came to Christmas Eve dinner every year. He stayed 1 hour. He ate nothing. He drank 1 glass of wine. He kissed his sister on the cheek, and he kissed Alina on the forehead, and he shook hands with the men, and he did not speak to Sofia, because he never spoke to Sofia, because by that Christmas she had been invisible to him for 17 years and she had decided at 22 that she was safe. She was standing at the sideboard, pouring water into a glass that did not need more water, and she had looked up, across the table, through the candle smoke, and he had been looking at her. Not scanning. Not passing. Looking for half a second and a half. Their eyes had met across her mother's dining room, across the bowl of figs and the uncarved lamb, and before she had understood what she was seeing, he had looked away first. He had turned his head. He had said something to the man next to him, and he had laughed, a laugh she had never heard him make in her life, a laugh that was too fast, and she had understood, standing with a pitcher of water in her hand and her heart making a sound she could hear in her teeth, that she was not invisible. She had never been invisible. He had known she was there, for 5 years. He had known where she was standing in every room she had ever shared with him, and he had been the one turning his body 3 degrees away. And he had been doing it so well for so long that she had not seen him doing it. She had mistaken his averted eyes for indifference. They had been the opposite of indifference. They had been discipline. She had set the pitcher down. She had sat through the rest of the dinner. She had smiled and answered when spoken to. She had kissed her aunts and hugged Alina and wished her mother good night. She had taken the subway home to Red Hook. She had gone into her apartment and she had sat on the edge of her bed in her coat for a long time, and she had understood that whatever she had thought she was carrying for the last 5 years was only half of the weight. He had been carrying the other half. For longer, maybe. Possibly much longer. She was 22. She had understood she was not going to be able to keep carrying this alone. She had also understood that she was going to have to, because he had looked away first. Which meant he had decided to look away. Which meant there was a reason he had decided to look away. And the only reason a man like Dario Morty looked away from a woman across a Christmas table was because he had made a promise, somewhere to someone, that he did not intend to break. She did not know yet who he had made it to. She had another 2 years to wait for that. She was going to spend those 2 years the way the first 5 had gone, carrying him in silence, and being carried by him in silence, across rooms, across holidays, across the 7-year distance of a promise neither of them was going to be the one to name. That was the woman who had walked into the Morty ballroom tonight. The woman with the door locked and also unlocked. The woman who had come to celebrate her cousin's 25th birthday, and who, 1 hour into the evening, was about to have every lock in her life broken open by a drunk man she had never met before. They called him the Quiet Wolf. Not because he was gentle. Because he could sit at your table, compliment your wife's cooking, ask about your children, and have your throat cut in the time it took you to walk to your car. Dario Morty had become the boss of the oldest family in New York when he was 33, and by the time he was 40, he had done something none of his grandfathers had managed. He had made the Mortys untouchable. Construction, shipping, 3 casinos, a bank in the Caymans that turned cash into tax returns, a half-interest in a steel union that could stop every high-rise south of Midtown with one phone call. He had done it quietly. He had done it legally, on paper. He had done it so well that the federal government had spent 9 years trying to build a case against him and had produced, in the end, a closed file and 2 retired agents. He was 48 now. His hair had silver only at the temples. He wore black always, the way priests wore black, the way executioners wore black. When he walked into a room, the room took half a step backward without meaning to. He had been married once. Her name was Camilla. She had been Alina's mother, and she had been dead for 19 years. A car bomb had killed her on a Tuesday morning in 2007. She had taken the driver's seat that morning because Dario had been on the phone with his consigliere and had kept her waiting. The bomb had been meant for him. No one had ever been charged. No one had ever confessed. The story in the Morty house was that Dario had not spoken for 6 weeks after Camilla was buried. The story in the Underworld was that the men who had built the bomb had each been found in a different borough in the month that followed, and no one had known who had placed them there, but everyone had understood anyway. The third story, the one only Sophia's mother had ever told her, was this. Dario had taken his wedding ring off on the morning of Camilla's funeral, held it in his palm through the entire mass, and then slid it back onto his finger at the cemetery and had not taken it off since. 19 years. He had worn the ring for 19 years. Sophia had noticed the ring the first time she had seen him after she fell in love with him. It had been the thing that had saved her. In a way, the thing that had made the love unreachable enough to survive. He was not hers, and he would never be hers because he was already somebody's, even if that somebody was a woman 19 years in the ground. Sophia had built her life around that ring. It was the wall her love lived behind. So long as he wore it, she could carry what she felt for him because what she felt could not possibly come out. So long as he wore it, she was safe from herself. Tonight, the ring was still on his finger. Sophia had checked the moment she walked into the ballroom. She had checked the way a soldier checks for her sidearm. It was there. She was safe. She was not safe at all. Sophia Conti, on paper, was a florist. She worked in a shop on Atlantic Avenue that smelled of eucalyptus and old cardboard and had a ceiling fan that turned in the wrong direction because nobody had ever bothered to fix it. Her boss was a Greek woman named Thea who did not know, and was never going to know, that the quiet girl who arranged her lilies had been born into a family that owned the warehouse across the street. Sophia had turned her back on the Conti money at 17. She had told her mother she wanted a life that was hers, and Adriana Conti, who had rarely denied her daughter anything, had looked at her across the kitchen table and said, "You will not be able to walk away from us, but you may walk beside us." Take that or take nothing. Sophia had taken it. She had moved into a studio apartment in Red Hook with one radiator and one window and a deadbolt she had installed herself. She took the subway. She drank bad coffee. She worked 6 days a week for Thea. She lived, by every visible measure, the life of a girl who had fallen out of her family's gravity and landed on her feet. What the subway riders and the customers and her boss Thea did not see was this. Sophia never sat with her back to a door. Sophia could field strip a Sig Sauer P226 in the dark in 41 seconds. Sophia carried a knife strapped to the inside of her left calf every day of her life, even in summer, because a man named Cade had told her when she was 12 that a woman who did not carry a blade was a woman who had made peace with being prey. Cade had trained her for 8 years. He had appeared at Adriana Conti's front door the week after Sophia's 11th birthday. A thin man with a soft voice and hands scarred in patterns that Sophia would later learn were from garrote wire. He had said to Adriana, "I was promised. It is time." Adriana had cried. She had cried for a long time, standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, and then she had stepped aside and let him in. Sophia had asked her mother, years later, who had promised Cade, and Adriana had said only, "A man you do not remember." Sophia had understood that some questions were not asked in the Conti house, so she had learned. She had learned the knife. She had learned the gun. She had learned the 3 languages Cade said she would need one day, though he had never said for what. She had learned to move through a crowd without being seen, to read a room in a second, to mark every exit without appearing to look. She had learned all of this, and she had told no one, and she had gone to work at a flower shop, and she had fallen in love with a man she believed was her blood, and she had held that love inside her chest for 7 years like a bird she was slowly starving to death. That was the woman who had walked into the Morty ballroom tonight, and the invitation had come on a Tuesday in October. Elena had called the shop, because Sophia never answered her cell phone. Elena had said, "Sophia, I am turning 25 on Saturday, and if you do not come to my party, I will drive across the bridge and drag you by your hair. The Mortys are hosting. Every family will be there. The Brunos, too, if you can believe it. Papa is trying to broker peace with them. Please come. Please." Sophia had closed her eyes against the cool metal of the shop's back counter. She had said, "I will come." And now here she was, in a black floor-length dress with her grandmother's gold cross at her throat, and 2 knives she had not told her mother about inside her clutch, and a man named Matteo Bruno had just reached for her wrist. He was 6'3". He had 60 pounds on her. He had been drunk for 2 hours before she had been introduced to him, and his father, Salvatore Bruno, 73 years old and old enough to know better, had not stopped him. Matteo had looked her up and down the way a man looks at a horse he is considering buying, and he had said, "So this is the cousin. The quiet one. Elena has been telling us about you. You work in a flower shop, yes, that is precious." His father had laughed. His father's laugh had been the sound of a door being closed in a room no one would ever enter again. Matteo had said, "And you are a Conti. Tell me, did your family cast you out, or did you just not have the stomach for the family business?" Sophia had felt Dario before she had seen him. He was on the far side of the ballroom, not moving, still wearing polite attention on his face like a mask he had put on in front of a mirror, but his eyes had found her, and she had understood instantly what was happening. This was a test, not Matteo's, Dario's. The Mortys and the Brunos were making peace tonight, a peace that had cost blood. If Sophia let Matteo humiliate her quietly, the peace would hold, because she would have taught the Brunos that the Contis were soft. If Sophia fought back, the peace would crack. Dario could not intervene. He was the host. Everything he had built tonight depended on the daughter of his sister standing still, while a drunk man 3 times her size took her apart in public. Sophia had understood all of this in the space of 3 heartbeats. She had also understood with a clarity that had surprised her that she did not care. She had said, "Mr. Bruno, do you know what my family business is?" Her voice had not been loud. It had changed, though, gone very quiet and very even, and somewhere underneath it a string had begun to vibrate. Matteo had blinked. He had said, "The Contis are in shipping, and you are a little cousin of the Morty girl." Sophia had said, "No, that is what my family looks like to you. Let me tell you what it is." And she had told him. She had told him about her grandfather Enzo and the 7 men and the copper pipe on the Red Hook docks in 1958. She had told him about her grandmother Isabella and the oleander in the tomato sauce. She had told him about her mother Adriana, who had never raised her voice, which was how you should know she was the most dangerous woman in the room. And then she had said, "And me, you want to know about me. I work in a flower shop because I like the smell of the lilies. I work in a flower shop because no one in this room has ever earned the right to know what I am capable of. She had taken one step closer to him. 1. Cade had taught her this. You close distance before they understand you have moved. And Mateo, because he was a bully and a drunk and had never in his life been corrected by a woman, had reached for her wrist. And this was where we came in. The wrist break. It looked to the 200 people watching like a dance. He reached. She met his hand with her own. Her body turned. His wrist went down and around and behind him in one motion that was not 3, and Matteo Bruno made a sound that was not a word, and his knees hit the floor of the Morty ballroom, and his face ended up 6 inches from the hem of Sophia's black dress. She did not release him. She held him there. She leaned down. Her voice went quieter. She said, "You are going to apologize to Alina. By name, you are going to apologize to me, and then you are going to leave with your father." Matteo said something obscene. She pressed on his wrist a 1/4 inch. Matteo stopped talking because his mouth had filled with the metallic taste of what was about to be tears. Salvatore Bruno stepped forward. Old man, gray face, whetstone eyes. He said, "Sophia, that is your name. Sophia, please let him up." Sophia did not look at him. She said, "Apologize." Matteo said, "Alina, I am sorry." Sophia said to me. Matteo said to you, "I am sorry." She released him. He fell forward onto his hands. The room was so silent that Sophia could hear the grandfather clock in the next room. She straightened her dress. She turned to Salvatore Bruno. She said, "Mr. Bruno, thank you for coming. Please give my regards to your wife." Salvatore Bruno looked at her for a long moment. And in that moment, something crossed his face that Sophia would not understand until an hour later. It was not anger. It was not even outrage. It was recognition. He looked at her the way a man looks at a ghost he has been waiting for his entire life. He bowed, just slightly, just an inch, the way old men bow to things they have recognized and will have to think about later. He took his son's elbow. He walked out. The front door of the Morty mansion closed behind them with a sound every person in the ballroom heard. Sophia turned. Dario had not moved, but his face was no longer arranged in polite attention. His face was not arranged in anything. It was the first time she had ever seen his face without a shape on it. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her across her mother's Christmas table 2 years ago, except that this time he was not going to look away first. He set down his glass. He crossed the ballroom. The guests parted for him the way water parts for a blade. When he reached her, he stopped 1 foot away and he looked down at her and he said, "Sophia, come with me." She went. He led her through a side door down a hallway past the kitchen where the catering staff had frozen mid-motion, up the back stairs, down the corridor of oil paintings of dead Mortys. His study was at the end. He opened the door. He held it for her. She walked past him and she felt the heat of him and she smelled the cologne he had worn since she was 10 and she did not look at him. He closed the door behind them. He locked it. He said, "Sit down." She said, "I will stand." He said, "Sophia, sit." She sat. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders very still. He said, "Who trained you?" She said, "A man named Cade." He said, "Cade is dead. He died 4 years ago in Marseille." She said, "I know." Silence. He said, "Then who has been training you since he died?" She said, "No one. He trained me well enough." Silence. He turned. His face had arranged itself again, but not into politeness, into something she had never seen before. Something hard and bright and close to breaking. He said, "Do you know who Cade was?" She said, "A man my mother hired." He said, "Your mother did not hire him. Your mother has not in her life been permitted to make a decision that serious without consulting me. Cade was mine. I sent him to her." She said, "Why?" He looked at her. He did not answer. She said, "Dario." "Why?" It was the first time in her life she had called him by his name. She had always called him Uncle or Mr. Morty or nothing at all because there had been no word that was safe. His jaw moved. He said, "Because I promised." She said, "Promised who?" He walked away from the window. He sat down in the leather chair across from her. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at her for a long moment and she saw for the first time how tired he was. Not sleepy. Tired. The tiredness of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had been told he was not allowed to set it down. He said, "Sophia, you are not my niece." Her hand came up to her throat without her telling it to. She said, "What?" He said, "You are not my sister Adriana's daughter. Adriana did not give birth to you. She adopted you when you were 6 days old. Everyone in this family knows. You are the only one who does not." She said, that is not, Dario." He said, "It is." She said, "My mother." He said, "Your mother loves you more than her own life." She has been your mother for 24 years. She is your mother, but she did not bear you. She said, who, he said, Rosa Valenti. She died in childbirth. Sophia's hand was still at her throat. She could feel her pulse against her fingers. She said, Valenti. He said, yes. She said, Marco. He said, yes. She said, Marco Valenti was, he said, he was my friend. She said, what? He said, he was my friend. Sophia. He was the closest friend I ever had. And then he stopped. And then he told her. And as he told her, something happened in Sophia that she had not expected. She did not hear his voice anymore. She heard a different voice. She heard the voice of a dying man in the back of a moving car in 2002, a voice she had never heard in her life, a voice that she suddenly and with a certainty that terrified her recognized as her father's. The voice said, Dario, listen, listen to me. I am not going to, Dario, I am not going to make it. Dario in the car was saying, yes you are, don't talk, just save your breath, we are almost there, hold on. Marco Valenti said, stop the car, I am not going to, I need you to listen. The car did not stop. The driver kept driving. The hospital was 19 minutes away. Marco Valenti was not going to make it 19 minutes. He knew it. Dario knew it. Marco's blood was on Dario's shirt and on his hands and on the leather of the back seat, and Marco was holding Dario's wrist, and Marco was saying, my wife. Rosa. Dario said, she is safe. She is at your sister's. Marco said, Rosa is dead. Dario stopped. He said, what? Marco said, this morning. The baby came. Rosa, she did not, the doctor could not, she bled out, Dario. She is in the morgue at Mount Sinai, and the baby is at my sister's in New Jersey, 6 days old. And Bruno is going to come. Dario said, Marco said, Bruno is going to come for her. He will not let a Valenti grow up, even a girl, especially a girl, you have to take her. Dario said, I will. Marco, I will. Marco said, promise me. Dario said, I promise. Marco said, say her name. Rosa named her. Her name is Sophia, say it. Dario said, Sophia. Marco said, good. And then Marco said, and this is the thing Sophia had not known. The thing Dario was telling her now in his study. 23 years later, Marco said, Dario, one more thing. Dario said, anything. Marco said, do not let yourself love her. Dario said, what? Marco said, when she grows up, do not. Swear it to me. Dario said, Marco said, swear it, I know you. I know you better than you know yourself. If you raise her, if you watch her grow up, you will. Dario, you will. And she will be my daughter. Swear you will not. Dario, sitting in his leather chair across from Sophia 23 years later, said, and I swore. I swore to a dying man. I held his hand and I swore. Sophia was not breathing. Dario said, he died 12 minutes later. Before we got to the hospital, I drove to New Jersey that night. I took you from his sister's arms. I brought you to my sister Adriana, who had lost a baby of her own 3 months earlier and had told no one but me. I gave you to her. I said, this is your daughter now. Raise her. Tell no one, and she raised you, and she loved you. And I kept my oath, for 23 years. I did not let myself. I left rooms when you walked into them. I paid for your school and never attended a graduation. I sent Cade to your mother when you turned 11 because I had promised Marco I would give you the tools to defend yourself in a world I could not tell you about. I did all of that. And I did not love you. And then you turned 17. Sophia said, Dario. He said, you turned 17, and you came to Alina's birthday, and you stood on the balcony of my penthouse at midnight, and you looked back through the glass at me, and I looked up, and I saw you looking, and I understood 2 things at once. Her hand was shaking. She said 2 things. He said, I understood that you had just, in that moment, become a woman who was in love with me. And I understood that I had been a man who was in love with you for a longer time than I had let myself know. She said, Christmas. He said, yes. She said, 2 years ago, you looked at me, over the table. He said, I have looked at you every time you have been in a room with me since you were 17. I have looked at you, Sophia, from the moment you put your foot over the threshold to the moment you left. I have looked at you the entire time while I was doing everything else, while I was running a city, while I was burying men, while I was brokering pieces. I have not stopped. I made the oath look easy, but it has cost me every day of 7 years. She said, Dario. He said, I did not break it. Sophia, I did not. I carried it. I would have carried it until I died. She said, why are you telling me now? He said, because tonight, downstairs. You told Matteo Bruno what your grandmother did to a Bruno widow in 1962. You said the name out loud in public. You called the Brunos liars in front of every family in New York. Salvatore Bruno cannot let that stand. He will come for you, tonight, within hours. Sophia said, let him come. Dario said, that is not all. She said, what else? He said, Salvatore Bruno killed your father. She said, I know. He said, Salvatore Bruno also killed my wife. The room went very quiet. Sophia said, "What?" Dario said, "The car bomb, 19 years ago, the one that killed Camilla. It was Bruno." She said, You knew." He said, "I have known for 6 years." She said, "And you have not." He said, "I have not." "Why you are asking?" "Because I was waiting." She said, "Waiting for what?" He said, "For you." He looked at her. His eyes were wet. She had never in 7 years seen his eyes wet. He said, "I could have avenged Camilla. I could have walked into Salvatore Bruno's house 6 years ago with 4 men and I could have ended him. I did not, Sophia, because I knew. I knew that one day the woman I was not allowed to love would come to me and she would be her father's daughter and she would want the man who killed Marco Valenti. And I could not take that from her. I could not give Bruno to my wife if it meant stealing him from you. So I waited. I have been waiting 6 years. For you to ask." Sophia stood up. She said, "I am asking." Dario stood up. He said, "I am coming with you." She said, "No." He said, "Sophia," she said, "Dario, listen to me. I am the daughter of the man Bruno killed. And I am the woman of the man whose wife Bruno killed. If you come with me, it is a war, every family in New York watching us. If I go alone, it is a daughter, taking what is hers, nothing more. Do you understand?" He said, "I understand. But I do not like it." She said, "I did not ask you to like it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned. He walked to his desk. He pulled up the Persian rug. He opened a floor safe. He took out 2 guns, 2 knives, a burner phone, a set of car keys. He set them on the desk. He said, "The car is in the 4th garage. Drive to Garden City. Park 2 blocks out. There is a culvert on the east side of Bruno's estate, dry in October. It runs under the fence, comes up behind the pool house. His dogs are kenneled at night. His motion sensors do not cover the pool house. He sleeps in his study on Saturday nights. His wife cannot stand the sound of his breathing. She sleeps in the east wing, you understand." Sophia said, "How do you know all this?" He said, "I have been mapping it for 6 years." She crossed to the desk. She took the guns, she took the knives, she tucked them into her dress the way Kate had taught her. She took the keys, she took the phone. She looked up at him. He was standing very still. She said, "Dario." He said, "Yes." She said, "Take off the ring." He looked at his hand, at Camilla's ring. He said, "Sophia." She said, "Not for me, for her. Tonight I am killing the man who killed her. If you have ever loved her, take it off tonight. Carry her with you unringed. Whatever I bring back to this room, let me bring it back to a man who is not wearing another woman's ring." He looked at his hand for a very long time. Then he slid the ring off. He set it on the desk. He did not put it on the mantel. He did not put it in a drawer. He set it on the desk in plain sight where she would see it when she came back, a promise and a threshold. If she came back, she walked to the door, she stopped. She turned. She said, "I will come back." He said, "Sophia." She said, "What?" He said, "If you do not." She said, "Then you will know that I loved you my whole life and I died knowing you loved me too, and that will be enough." He said, "It will not be enough." She said, "It will have to be." She walked out. The drive to Garden City took 47 minutes. Sophia did not play the radio. She thought about Rosa Valenti, the woman who had bled to death giving birth to her in a hospital she had never seen. She thought about Marco Valenti, whispering her name into a dying breath in the back of a car. She thought about Camilla Morty, who had been assigned to drive her husband to a meeting on a Tuesday in 2007 and had kept him waiting, and had taken the driver's seat herself and had turned the key. Sophia thought about all of them. She thought, "Tonight you will get what you are owed." She parked 2 blocks from the Bruno estate. She walked. The October sky was black and clean. She crawled through the culvert. She came up behind the pool house. She moved around it, through the garden, across the patio to the French doors at the back of the kitchen. She picked the lock in 40 seconds. She moved through the kitchen, through the dining room, up the back stairs. She stopped outside the study. She could hear a television playing softly. A black and white film, an Italian voice. Fellini, maybe. The door was ajar. She pushed it open with the toe of her shoe. Salvatore Bruno was sitting in a leather chair with his back to the door watching the film. A glass of Amaro was on the side table. A half-smoked cigar was in the ashtray. He did not turn. He said, "Sophia, I knew you would come tonight. Please, come around. Let me see your face." Sophia did not move. Bruno said, "The gun in your right hand is a Beretta, I think. The knife in your dress." "I cannot see, but I know it is there. I am not armed. I dismissed my men. I sent them home an hour ago. I told them I was not feeling well. This is just you and me. Come around. I would like to look at you when I say what I am going to say." Sophia moved around the chair. She kept her back to the wall. She did not sit. Bruno looked up at her. His wet stone eyes were tired. He said, "You have your father's mouth." Sophia said, "Stop." He said, "All right." Sophia said, "You killed my father." Bruno said, "Yes." Sophia said, "And Dario Morty's wife." Bruno's face did not change. He said, "Yes." Sophia said, "Why?" Bruno's hand reached for the Amaro. It was shaking. It had not been shaking a moment ago. He lifted the glass. He drank. He set it down. Amaro spilled on his cuff. He did not wipe it. He said, "Your father, that one is simple. Heroin, old dispute. He would not let me. I went around him. He found out. He was going to me. First. I did it first." That is the whole story. There is no better version of it. It was money, she said, and Camilla. Bruno closed his eyes. He said, "That one." She said, "What?" He said, "That one is not. That one I cannot." He opened his eyes. They were wet. He said, "My son, Giovanni, in 2006. He was killed by Morty soldiers. They did it because he had raped a Morty cousin, a girl, 15. I did not at the time. I believed him. I believed he was innocent. I believed my son because he was my son." He stopped. He said, "I ordered the bomb. I did not know his wife would drive. I did not care about his wife. I wanted him. And a woman was dead and not the one I had, and a year later a priest in Palermo. He had heard my son's confession before the Mortys got to him. The priest, he came to me. He told me. He said, 'Your son did what they said he did.' He said it 3 times. My son had raped a child, and I had killed a woman to avenge him." Sophia said, "And you have lived." Bruno said, "I have lived. In this house, I have eaten food. I have slept in my bed. I have watched films because I am a coward. Because I could not do the thing I should have done 18 years ago, which was walk into Dario Morty's study and tell him. Hand him a gun. Kneel. And I could not. Because I had a wife and a daughter. And I told myself every morning that I would go tomorrow. And tomorrow I said the day after. And now I am 73 and it is 18 years and I have never gone." Sophia said, "And tonight?" Bruno said, "Tonight I saw you, across the ballroom. You have your father's mouth and your mother's eyes and your grandmother's hands, and I looked at you, and I understood, the way an old man understands the weather, that you were the thing I had been waiting for. I did not send my son to provoke you. Matteo is a drunk. He did that on his own. But when he did it, I thought, good. Let her answer him, let her come, and you came. Sophia said, "You want me to kill you." Bruno said, "I want you to do what your blood is going to do. I am not going to fight it. I have been waiting for it for 19 years in Camilla's name and 23 in your father's, and tonight you are the closing of both accounts. You are the only person in this city who has the right." Sophia raised the Beretta. Her hand was steady. Kate had trained the shake out of her hand when she was 13. Bruno said, "One thing." Sophia said, "What?" Bruno said, "Tell Dario about Camilla. Tell him I said her name at the end. Tell him I said her name and I was not worth the breath it took to say it. Tell him the son I defended was guilty. Tell him I know. Tell him I have known for 18 years. And tell him that if there is a hell, I will be there by morning. And I will look for her. And I will kneel. And I will tell her it will not matter, but I will do it. Will you tell him?" Sophia said, "Yes." Bruno said, "Thank you." He closed his eyes. He said, "Camilla." He said it once, quietly. The way a man says a name he has not been permitted to say for a long time. Sophia fired, once, center mass. The Beretta kicked against her hand the way Kate had taught her to expect, and the report was louder than she had remembered reports being, because she had not fired in a closed room since she was 20, and the smell of cordite came up into her face, and Bruno's body jerked once and went still, and the glass of Amaro tipped off the table and shattered on the rug. A small wet sound came out of his throat and the black and white film kept playing. Sophia stood very still. She waited. Kate had trained her to watch for 1 full minute after a killing because a man who looks dead is not always dead. She watched. Her hand was shaking now. It had not been shaking before. It was shaking now. A minute passed. Bruno did not move. The blood on his shirt had stopped spreading. She holstered the Beretta. She turned. She walked out of the study. She walked down the back stairs. She walked through the kitchen. She went out the French doors. She moved through the garden and the pool house and the culvert, and somewhere in the culvert, crawling on her elbows in the dry leaves, she threw up. She threw up into the leaves, and she stayed on her hands and knees for a moment, and she pressed her forehead against the cold October dirt, and then she got up and she kept going. She walked 2 blocks to the car. She got in. She drove. She did not put on the radio. She was still shaking. Her hands were on the wheel, and her hands were shaking, and she let them shake, because Cade had said that a woman who killed a man and did not shake was a woman who had become something she did not want to be. She thought, halfway across the bridge, that she should cry. She waited for it. It did not come. She thought, I have just killed a man. She thought, I have just avenged my father. She thought, I have just avenged the woman whose husband I love. She thought I should feel something about this. And then slowly, like a thing coming up through deep water, she understood what she was feeling. It was not guilt. It was not triumph, it was this. For the first time in her entire life, she was not carrying anyone else's sentence. Not her mother's lie, not her father's oath, not Dario's promise, not Cade's training, not Camilla's ghost. All of them had been cleared, by her hand, tonight. She was 24 years old, and she was not Sophia Conti, and she was driving a car that belonged to no one through Long Island in the hour before dawn, and for the first time in her life she was only herself. She parked in the fourth garage. She got out of the car. Her legs did not work at first. She held on to the door for a moment. She breathed. She walked across the lawn. The sky was beginning to gray at the eastern edge. She walked in through the side door, up the back stairs, down the corridor of dead Morty's. She stopped outside Dario's study. She did not open the door. She could not for a second. She put her hand flat on the wood. She leaned her forehead against it. She was still shaking. She was still smelling of cordite and cold dirt, and there was Bruno's blood on one cuff of her sleeve, and she had not noticed it in the garage, but she noticed it now, a small dark place the size of a coin, and she pressed her forehead against the wood of Dario's door, and she said in a voice too quiet for him to hear through it, "I am back. I am back. I am back." Then she opened the door. He was there. He had not slept. He had not moved. The ring was still on the desk where he had set it. He looked up when she opened the door. He stood. She took one step in. Her legs went. He was across the room before she hit the floor. He caught her. He caught her against his chest, and her knees were on the rug, and his arm was around her back, and his other hand was in her hair, and she was against him, against his shirt, against the smell of him, and she was not crying, and she was not speaking, and she was shaking, and he held her. He held her for a long time. He did not speak. He held her. After a while, when she could, she said, "I, Dario," he said, SHH. She said, "I did it. I did, Dario, I did it." He said, "I know." She said, he said to tell you about her. He said her name at the end. He said the son he killed for was guilty. He said he has known for 18 years. He said if there is a hell, Dario's face above her, very close, had not changed. He was looking down at her. He said, and her name. She said, Camilla. He said it just that, once. He said he was not worth the breath. Dario closed his eyes. A line of water came out from under one of them, just one. It went down the side of his nose and caught in the corner of his mouth. He did not wipe it. He said 19. She said, "What?" He said, 19 years, Sophia. I have waited 19 years to hear her name come out of his mouth, and I could not be the one to, because if I had gone to him, I would have killed him for me. And she deserved better than that. She deserved someone who was doing it for her. And you did. She said, "I did." She was still shaking. He pulled her in tighter against him. He put his mouth against her hair. He said into her hair, "Thank you." She said, "Don't." He said, "Thank you, Sophia." She said, "Dario, don't." I did not do it for thanks. He said, "I know, I am thanking you anyway." She let him. She pressed her face into his shirt. She smelled him. He smelled of cigar smoke and cedar and the cologne he had worn since she was 10. Underneath all of it, he smelled of a man who had not slept and who had been afraid. She had never before in her life smelled Dario Morty afraid. He was warm. His heart was moving fast against her ear, and after a while her own heart slowed to meet it, and after a while longer so did her hands. She said against his chest, I need to sit down." He said, "Come here." He did not let her go. He brought her up with him as he stood. He walked her to the leather chair. He sat her in it. He knelt in front of it. He put his hands on her knees. He looked up at her. He said, "Sophia, look at me." She looked. He said, "You are alive." She said, "Yes." He said, "You are alive and you are in this room and I have you. Say it." She said, "I am alive and I am in this room and you have me." He said, "Good." She said, "Dario." He said, "Yes." She said, "I am 24 years old." He said, "I know." She said, I do not know how to do this. The next part. The part after the room. I know how to do the ballroom. I know how to do the wrist. I know how to do the car and the culvert, and I know how to do the beretta. Cade taught me those. He did not teach me the next part. He said, Sophia. She said, I am afraid of, he said, of what? She said, of being the thing I love you with. I have loved you with my training, with my silence, with my distance. I know how to love you like that. I have loved you like that for 7 years. I do not know how to love you in a room with a door that opens. He closed his hands on her knees. He said, Sophia, I do not know either. I have not loved a woman in a room in 19 years. I have been a man in a house, walking past the bed on her side because her ring was on my hand and her ring was the only thing on my hand. I do not know how to do the next part either. She said then. He said, then we learn, slowly, in this room first and then the house. And then if we out loud in public in front of the families, but we start here, tonight in this chair, with your knees under my hands and your hair smelling of, he stopped. He said, of cordite. She said, yes. He said, I have smelled that before, on myself, I do not mind it. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost not. She said, Dario. He said, yes. She said, take me to the window. He did. He stood up. He held out his hand. She took it. He did not let go. He led her to the window. The sun was just starting to come up over the sound. He stood behind her. He put one hand on the glass over her shoulder, the other on her waist. Light, very light, a question. She leaned back against him, a small, slow movement, an answer. He said quietly into the top of her head, Marco knew. She said, what? He said, when he made me swear. I have been thinking the whole time you were gone, about the oath, and I have understood something. Marco knew I would break it. She turned in his arms. She looked up at him. She said, how? He said, because he was my friend, because he knew me. Because he was dying in my arms and he looked at my face when I said I would take you and he knew what I was going to feel in 20 years. He also knew I am a man who keeps oaths. If he had said, Dario, love her, raise her as your own, fall in love with her one day, I would have refused him. I would have run from it. But he said, do not love her. Swear it. And I swore. And I spent 23 years not loving you, Sophia, as hard as I have ever tried to do anything. And I failed. She said, Dario. He said he knew I would fail. He gave me the oath knowing I would fail. He gave us the only gift a dying Sicilian knew how to give. A forbidding that was secretly a permission. He gave us 23 years of distance so that when we found each other, we would find each other already knowing what it cost. So that we would not waste it. She said, you are sure. He said, I am sure. She said, how are you sure? He said, because he was my friend. And I am only now tonight, 23 years later, understanding that he spent his last breath thinking about the two of us, not his business. Not his killers, not his revenge, us. He died thinking about us. If that is not a blessing, Sophia, I do not know what a blessing is. She said, Dario. He said, yes. She said, kiss me. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not move. His hand came up slowly from her waist to her jaw. He did not grip. He held. He turned her face up an inch. His thumb moved just once across her lower lip, very slowly, the way a man touches a thing he has been told for a very long time not to touch and cannot yet believe he is allowed to. She felt his breath on her mouth. She felt her own pulse in her throat. She felt him counting somewhere down from some number only he knew, and she waited. He kissed her. Slowly. Carefully. The way a man kisses a woman he has been forbidden from kissing for 23 years, who has just by her own hand unforbidden both of them. Not quickly, not hungrily, with a question in it, and then with the answer to the question, and then, when both were understood, with something deeper than either, which was relief. There was salt on her mouth from tears she had not known had come out, and he tasted it, and he did not stop, and when he lifted his head, his forehead was against hers, and he was breathing the way a man breathes after he has set down a weight he has been carrying for a long time. He said, Sophia. She said, yes. He said, Sophia Valenti. She said, yes. He said, that is your name. You are going to take it. She said, in the morning. He said, and your mother. She said, I am going to see her. I am going to tell her I know. I am going to tell her she is still my mother because she has been my mother for 24 years and a name does not change that. I am going to ask her for her blessing. I am going to ask her for my father's things. He said, and then. She said, and then I am going to come back here. He said, and then. She said, and then we are going to learn how to do the next part. He said slowly. She said slowly. She stepped back. She walked to the desk. She picked up Camilla's ring. She walked to the mantel, above the fireplace. A photograph of Alina at 12, a small silver crucifix. Sophia set the ring on the mantel between them. The sun, coming in through the window, was rising. The light came across the mantel, and it went through the gold of the ring, and it fell as a small, bright circle on the glass of Alina's photograph. Sophia said, here, where she can see you, where you can see her, where you are not carrying her on your hand anymore. Dario did not speak. He watched her do it. When she stepped back, he said, thank you. She said, do not thank me. He said, I am thanking you anyway. She said, I think this is the kind of marriage we are going to have, thanking each other for things the other person did not do for thanks. He said, I think so too. She walked back to him. She put her hand flat on his chest. She said, I am going to go see my mother now. He said, yes. She said, I will be back before noon. He said, yes. She said, Dario. He said, yes. She said, do not move the ring. He said, I will not. She said, do not move anything. He said, I will not. She said, just sit here. Wait. He said, yes. She walked to the door. She turned. She looked at him once, standing in his study in the light that was coming up over the sound, with Camilla's ring catching the sun on the mantel behind him and a woman who had been dead for 19 years watching him, finally, with her blessing, love somebody she would never meet. Sophia said, Dario. He said, Sophia. She said, I loved you the whole time. I want you to know that. Even when I thought it was a sin, I loved you. He said, I loved you the whole time. Even when I had sworn not to. I loved you. She walked out. She crossed the lawn. She got into the car. She did not look back at the house. She drove east, toward the city, toward her mother's apartment, toward the kitchen table where she had sat as a girl and where she was about to sit as a woman who knew everything. And she thought about her father, who had held Dario Morti's hand in the back of a car, and had, with his last breath, handed his friend a lock in the shape of a key. And she thought about her mother, who had taken a 6-day-old baby into her arms and had lied to her for 24 years out of love. And she thought about Camilla Morti, whom she had never met, whose husband she now loved, whose ring was now on a mantel catching a morning light she had not been alive to see. She thought about Cade, who had taught her to field strip a Sig Sauer in 41 seconds and had never once told her why. She thought about Rosa Valenti, whose mouth she had. She thought, as she drove across the bridge in the new sun, that a great many people had loved her into this morning. None of them had been alive to see her arrive. But they had all been here, in the culvert, in the car, in the study, at the door. She was carrying them. She was not being carried by them. There was a difference, and the difference was a life. Behind her in the Morti mansion, Dario sat down in the leather chair where she had sat, and he put his head in his hands, and he wept once for perhaps 40 seconds without making any sound, and then he stopped, and he sat up, and he looked at the mantel, and he said, out loud to the ring, forgive me. The ring did not answer. It did not have to. The light was still going through it, and Alina's face at 12 was still lit inside the circle of it, and the answer was in the light. She had loved her cousin's Mafia boss father in secret for 7 years. But the truth, when it came, had not been a curse. The truth had been the door. The oath had been the key. Her father, dying in the back of a car in 2002, had pressed the key into both of their hands without telling them. The truth had not changed everything. The truth had let everything finally begin.